And what a wonderful panel. Good morning. We're still hanging out in the mornings. No, we're not. We've moved to afternoon. So it's so lovely to see everyone there. So Jason, thank you so much for that panel and to all of our great speakers on this. I hope you're enjoying the morning. We have a shorter day today, of course, but again, content-led, knowledge-rich. I mean, we're just so excited with all of the great events that we can bring you. Some of the speakers, some of the tremendous examples of people not just talking theory and not just talking about the future, I think also actually talking practical application of some of the great work that is going on, and perhaps some of the great work that maybe we don't get a chance to observe on the top headlines of the media sometimes when it comes to Africa. So it's very, very encouraging to see all of the great work that is happening here. And I do have to thank our swift turnaround. We're pretty much ready to go. Now, the roadshows that we've had have been a huge success. Of course, the virtual roadshows we had. And in a way, this one is now linking back to the roadshows. So I'm going to bring my panel on, I think in 3, 2, 1. They're going to join me here. And we're going to be looking at investment and in agriculture. So we'll just head off and we'll get this started. Thank you. And let me quickly introduce our panel. We have so much to talk about, and we will unveil all of their great work, so they don't need a long introduction on this. The CEO of MyGrowthFund Venture Partners in South Africa, a gentleman you have seen a little earlier, and I'm sure you have been very impressed and know who he is. So Vusi Thembekwayo, so lovely to have you back. I'm delighted that you're taking part in this panel. And also, probably another of the key industries in the world, we're going to be talking about agriculture. So Okisegere Ojepat joins me, also known as OJ. So OJ, for me, I'm delighted to have you here with me.
Thank you.
Vusi Thembekwayo, if I may start with you. Vusi, you talked earlier, about, and you look at your role in terms of venture capital, yes, in Africa, but also globally, I think, at this point here. The health of the venture capital industry, I mean, it didn't exist, 10 years ago? Talk to me just about how vibrant it is in Africa right now.
So there is a lot of empirical work that's been published both by the Southern African Venture Capital Association, which represents the body of VC companies, as well as private equity companies in the southern part of the continent, as well as AVCA, which is the African Venture Capital Association. Both of them publish several quantitative studies to give us a sense of how much capital is flowing. And what we've seen, certainly over the past 5 years, is an exponential rise in capital. Venture in the Southern African region, has experienced a CAGR of about 28% over the past 5 years. So that's astronomical rates of growth. I think the reason is because for the first time in a long time, people are understanding the asset class. And so 10 years ago, it wasn't that there wasn't an appetite for it, but rather that there just wasn't an understanding of the asset class. How does it work? How is it priced? How do you manage your risk? And for the first time in a long time, we're seeing firms like ourselves that understand the environment, that have credibility with investors, institutional investors, and wealthy families, et cetera, who want to take a position in the continent.
And it's a very exciting time in that sense, because also a lot of the areas for investment, indeed every sector, I would imagine, is wide open right now. OJ, let me bring you in here when we think about agriculture and when we think about food security. I think it's possibly on the top of every government's agenda in the world, not just Africa. How important and how much attention should we all be paying to the concept of food security?
Thank you so much. One thing we must agree, let me start by saying the world population is growing high by day. And because the world population is going high, the arable land is becoming smaller by day. And therefore, there is need for us to be able to get tired. We must be able to give science, innovation, and technology its space for us to be able to feed the world population. It's therefore important to get to know that it's not just about Africa, but most importantly for Africa is because then we are the source of the raw material that the world requires. It's time for Africa. It's time to rise up. It's time to transform agriculture. It's trying to get everyone on board. Whereas we go into tech, science, in farming, it's not going to be disconnected. And food security, then it's going to help us to be able to get the world secure, because then you cannot engage with anybody who is a hungry person. So it's important to get to know that food is what we're dealing with. And therefore, from where we sit in Africa, it's time for us to be in action. We need to transform the land, we need to add value, and we need to be able to ensure that everything that we do is done right, because the population is going up and there's no shortcut about it.
Yeah, and I think the concept of adding value is so important for every industry in Africa. We'll talk a little bit more about that. You see, you talk about the concept of building a spirit of enterprise, and you're not just talking about entrepreneurs. You're actually, I get the feeling you're talking much more of a mindset, of an ecosystem, and it's about really bringing all parts of society together to make sure that we think of this word maybe in a very, very different way.
Yeah. You know, the old African expression is that it takes a village to raise a child. And I think if we talk about building the economies of Africa and the economy of Africa into the future, we have to recognize that there is a village. And the village is not just the entrepreneurs themselves building these businesses. It's not just the traditional capital markets. It's also heavy and large industry. It's the old legacy industries of Africa, mining of which is a part, who have to recognize the role they have to play in becoming a part of the transformation of the continent too. You know, the old example about if you look at any technological device anywhere in the world, it's powered in some measure by a mineral that comes from a part of the continent. So the spirit of enterprise is not just about saying, well, let's go in and take a bet on an entrepreneur and a founder in a sector. It's about saying, let's take a wider view of the value chain of opportunities that are available. What we've seen work for our investors is this view. Take the value chain perspective. So if you are going to invest in a fintech platform, think a little bit about not only a fintech platform, but the enablers of that fintech platforms. Think a bit about the off-the-shelf technologies and how those off-the-shelf technologies need to be augmented to operate in a particular ecosystem. Think a bit about regulation and how you can. So if you take a value chain point of view, you, as the investor, are in charge of your destiny, rather than leaving it to the vagrancies of the markets.
And again, you mentioned that, OJ, very much, this concept of added value. And I think we look at Africa, and it's a very resource-rich country. And it always has been a resource-rich country. I think we look back on the legacy of, you know, the energy sector, whereby that raw material was just taken from the ground and moved. There was value added elsewhere. The mining sector is, I think, going through this at the moment when we look at the value added that almost could be and needs to be done in Africa. But in the agricultural space, where do we begin to add value there that can, you know, grow ecosystems, that can grow communities, and also that can provide a good living for people?
Thank you. From where we sit, energy is key. Energy is for manufacture, energy is for lighting. Energy is for small things that we do. Every single thing we do is about energy. So it's time we thought about energy in a totally different way in terms of transformation. We need to transform energy, we need to conserve energy, and we're not going to run away from it because we need energy in every place. We still in a continent, take an example of Kenya, whereas the government has worked very hard to ensure that there's energy penetration, electricity penetration, but we still have populations in Africa that have no electricity. And therefore that makes it very difficult for us to be able to achieve value add processing and be able to enhance the productivity. And when we talk about value add, we talk about food security, we talk about logistics in agri, we need energy right from the farm in terms of cold storage, managing the cold storage chain, in terms of processing, in terms of packaging, in terms of even flying to this place. If we all flew here, we used fuel, and that's energy. So it's important that we have a critical discussion around about energy. And for us in agri, there is no way we're going to separate it with energy. We need to run our packhouses, we need to run our greenhouses. But for us in Kenya, even the irrigation system in Africa must be run through the energy. So it's important that we see. And we get into mining, it's all clubbed into the soil. I must do soil test, I must do everything. And therefore, energy is not something we're going to run away with. And time for investors to look at energy in a totally different way and find out how innovation comes in, how science comes in. And as I said, by the end of the day, the entire world requires energy to be able to feed itself. If not, we'll all be dead one day. We need to look at it in a totally different way. And this is the time. And Africa is where we need to go to, because we have what it takes in terms of running solar and running literally everything called energy.
And just let me stay with you a moment. Now, here in this region, agri-tech is getting a lot of attention, and there's quite a lot of investment, I think, coming into agri-tech. In Africa, how could you perhaps lure some of that investment money to, are there projects in Africa that would actually suit the level of investment, production, particularly in the agri-tech space right now?
Let me speak to the investors and let them know that, listen here, there's no better place to invest other than Africa today. We have the raw material. And therefore, first of all, when you look at raw material, you do not want to carry raw material from Africa to other parts of the world to process and return it back to Africa. It's easy to invest in Africa because there are incentives. And I will talk about here, for example, in Kenya, the incentives that the government has put in place to be able to bring you. There's a private-public partnership. And the investment therein has been opened up, and Africa is open for business. In terms of crude oil, in terms of timber, in terms of literally all agri products, when we're looking at raw material, Africa is the place to be. So why will you want to go and invest elsewhere and carry raw material from a totally different part of the world when you can be able to process and manage from the same place and just send out a finished product? So it's a time to come and look at Africa. And I want to invite anybody who has not been in Africa and who has looked at Africa differently to get to know. The governments have worked on a legislation. Yesterday, we're told about free African continental free trade area that allows us to be able to break the barriers. And that's an opportunity for us to invest in Africa. And listen, for the investors from UAE, I want to say this. We are your neighbor, and therefore a safe place for you to invest. We are only 4.5 hours from here, and therefore it's time for you to come in. Governments and ourselves will work to facilitate, and it's time for you to come in. And listen, Africa is ripe. Africa is ready for business. Africa is not ready for aid, but we are ready for trade. It's time to invest. It's time to talk. And I will talk about this because I want to connect that energy, I want to connect that investment, and I want to connect that with food security. Where else you will get? We're indigenous, we're original. We are ready to engage. We don't need a broker anymore. Just come over. We will support you and get you to get what we want to do. So I want to say this, Elaine, listen, that it's a time for us to look at Africa with a totally different eye. It's time to look at Africa as the only place that we need to go.
Yes.
And I want to say this again.
Yes.
I want to say this, that we have a young population. Our labor cost is fairly cheap, and you can be able to afford. We are able to innovate. We have fairly educated group. We have young men and women that are looking strong. We have women and the youths that are energized and ready to go. So we are set. You only need to plug in, and all you need to do is which part of Africa you want to go. Kenya is next door. We have Mombasa, we have the ports, we have the airports, we literally have everything. And infrastructure has opened up, and it opens up every day. So really, if you don't invest in Africa, I don't know where else you want to go and invest.
No, and I mean, I see, I get your message, I listen to you, I hear what you're saying, but there's a lot of people not getting your message out there. And you look at the international media at the moment, and yes, we've read some very good, encouraging stories about what's happening in Africa. We're hearing a lot more of them here, and I think also it shows the importance of the African continent and how it plays into our life here in Dubai and the Middle East and all of that. You see, talk to me about who is investing, because right now, some people are scared. Yeah. I just did a big mining conference the other day, and they're sitting on the fence. Are they going to invest, or are they not? So how do you get them over, I suppose, the hump in terms of being scared to go to Africa?
Yeah. So Fully support your sentiments, by the way.
Thank you.
And I think what's important is to make this point, that like every region in the world, Africa is not its headlines. So you have to go beneath the headlines, right? Your question, for instance, about agri-tech. I remember being in Kenya, it must maybe 6 years ago or so, and there was this young upstart at the time called Twiga Foods, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And what they did is they built a technology platform that aggregates the rural, disintermediated industry that produces a lot of food and brought it into a centralized platform to give them access to market. Gulambali made the point yesterday, he is on the money, that in other parts of the world, particularly the more developed parts of the world, you leverage technology to disrupt the incumbent. In Africa, you leverage technology to include the excluded.
Yes.
So our mandate is very different. We don't build fintech platforms because we're trying to unseat banks. We build them because you've got a percentage of the population that doesn't have access to financial services. They're called the invisible average. These are the people who are more than the average, but they're invisible because you don't have data on them. So what do you sell? Who do you sell? At what price point? How do they pay? How do they buy? This is important because it answers your question in this way. I'm old enough to remember a time when in Africa we were talking about unicorns that came out of Africa, and 10 years ago, I think the number was 1. I think. Yeah. We're at over 10 now, and of that 10, 5 has happened in the past 18 months. Your question was who's investing? Well, the most recent transactions that have been done have been transactions that have come from SoftBank, which is, for those of you who are not aware, one of the largest venture capital funds in the world, as well as Tiger Global. So the rest of the world got the memo that if you want growth and you want spirited growth at a low barrier to entry with high margin market potential, Africa is the place to go. So today we talk about Go One is a unicorn, Flutterwave is a unicorn, and several, and these have just happened in the recent past. In our own business, in my own business, let me tell you what this means. We have an education business because a part of the work we do is we believe that giving capital to the underlying entrepreneurs and business owners is only half the problem. In my boardroom, I've got a placard that says, as we speak, the Federal Reserve is printing money. So just so we're clear, money is not a differentiator in Africa. It's just money. The question you've got to ask yourself is, beyond this instrument of fiat, what else are you willing to do? For us, we built a strong and robust education business. We partnered with Harvard Online, and we deliver to each and every single one of the businesses that we impact educational programs that are built by the best institutions in the world. So I not only give you the currency, but I give you the ability to understand how do you build a business? How do you scale? How do you know when you are the right entrepreneur for the right moment? Because businesses go through life cycles and funders don't mature businesses. Matured managers don't build a business for the second wave. How do you do that? So it takes a village, and the village is about recognizing that there is an ecosystem. I'd hate for us to come out of this conversation and think, well, it's just about we need to invest and put the money down. Sure, invest and put your money down, but bring the best people as well. Yeah. Bring technical skills and expertise. Bring people that understand how to build relationships, understand the local cultures and the environment. Bring the educators, bring the accelerators, bring the scalers. All of that is the village, this ingredient that it takes to make this incredible salad we call Africa. Yeah.
And I think at the very opening of this conference, when the chairman of DP World talked yesterday too, yeah, he actually said that really that it was education, that was going to be, I suppose, the new currency to make sure that the rest happened. OJ, when we look at education too, and, I can see its accessibility, possibly in the cities and everything more, with your background, and you've done a bit of farming yourself, but you're probably more in contact with the people in some of the rural areas, and we look at rural development and we look at really how, you move this forward and you add value there. How important is education, in perhaps the rural areas, probably even more important, and also maybe keeping people in the rural areas and making sure that they can actually develop the resources of the land to become, maybe the agri-tech comes back there, but also to become actually very successful people.
Thank you. Let me say it again. As I said earlier, Africa is ready. Education is an equalizer. education is purely an equalizer. And today, the rural communities and the penetration of tech, let me take an example of Kenya. If it was not for education, we'll not be having M-Pesa. And M-Pesa is basically because of education. And if that comes from a rural young man that came from the village, it means that education can be taken there. So it's time to invest in education because it's the only equalizer for all of us. And this has nobody in terms of a class. The difference, I keep saying, between each one of us is not about anything. It's about how much exposed we are. So it's time to invest on education. And for where I come from, it's time to encourage the young men and women to get into education, and particularly agri. Because by the end of the day, after this session, we'll all be going for lunch. Where do you think that food is coming from? It's coming from people who are exposed, who are educated, who are able to bring it here for us to be able to eat. In farming, we're talking about traceability. We're talking about tracking that. We're talking about logistics. We're talking about money, and we're talking about agribusiness. It can all come out from people who are not educated. So it's time for us to look at agri differently and educate people. But listen, before I finish, let me just drum support for Kenya and say, listen, we have the best flowers in the world. It comes from educated community. We sell best avocados in the world. We have mangoes in the world. We have beans, green beans. We literally have all fresh produce that we export all over. I can't forget tea. I can't forget coffee. That is what educating our people and our populations. And therefore, when you invest in agri, you're basically investing in supporting that rural farmer in Kenya, in Africa, to be able to take their children to school. Because we are educated, because largely we are an agri-based economy in Africa generally. Apart from a few countries, but most of African countries are basically agri. So if we are looking at investment, let's invest in agri, because the returns from that investment to the farmers takes our students, our children from the local community to school, and now brings an equalizer. We're here because of education. If I didn't go to school, I won't be farming, I won't be here. It's because education has brought us together, an equalizer. But I want to speak this way and say, listen here, again I repeat that none of us can survive on the face of the earth today without the other. And listen, yes. You can be a powerful person, but unless you are satisfied, it's all nothing. We must all go down and say, how do we balance tech? How do we balance science? How do we bring education in? Because science and tech is not coming from anywhere other than education. So if there's anybody looking at investing, this is the best time to invest, and invest in education so that we are an equalizer, because the world is becoming a global village by day. I could speak about this more and more. But listen, it's not time to talk. It's time to get into action. I think we've been in boardrooms and conferences enough. I want to see action moving. I want to see things moving. I want to see one step at a time. I want us to rally together. We are stronger, and therefore we need to work together, friends. We need to work together.
And I think we've started on that, and I think if I have two people here, who can actually begin to lead us there.
I just want to say, OJ's partially right. Kenya has good avos, but South Africa has better. I'm just saying.
And as you're just saying, and you can buy a little bit here and there, yes, but we keep an eye on what you're selling at the minute. But talk to me about, again, locally owned business, businesses who are investing, Africa investing in Africa. Are we seeing much more of that? And then where can Dubai fit into this?
So the great thing is this, right? So I love this monicum about Africa beyond the headlines. So if you think about a beautiful country like Botswana, for instance, right? I think the population is just over 2 million people thereabout. The Botswana story has often centered around its mineral wealth, but what most people don't know is that the financial services industry of Botswana is actually growing. right? And it's not just growing, but it's becoming one of the preferred centers to set up a regional investment hub if you want to get in. So even if you're thinking about investing in Southern Africa, you've now got South Africa, which for the longest time has been the leader in the market. And as a South African, I hold a particular view, and that view, of course, is biased, which is that we are the best, but we're the best because we're the best. But beyond that, you've got a beautiful country like Botswana, great place to base yourself. You've got Mauritius. And so there's been a development of these new territories that are thinking about how do we become the gateway to the continent. I mention this only to make the following point, which is that for the first time in a long time, you have opportunity and options. Just 2 years ago, one of the leading banks in the continent, Rand Merchant, published a study talking about what was happening in North Africa, and some of the North African countries looking to become the base for capital to get into the continent. And what they were seeing was that it was not just the external investors coming into the continent, but internal investors investing themselves. You'll hear later Puti, who I have a lot of respect for, who runs one of the largest kind of, conglomerate media empires. But they have an investment business called the Naspers Foundry, whose entire foundation is about taking capital and investing it in the continent. They're not the only ones. Anglo-American has done similar, De Beers, similar. So large industry recognized some time ago that you can't have an economy built purely off the base of big business. It is, as Chairman Mao said, letting 1,000 flowers bloom, that you needed to create an environment where even the smaller players had the opportunity, but the large business had to become a part of that. Your second question was quite direct, which is, so what can we do, right? Where can we go? I've been here now a month, we've been setting up here, and one of the things I've noticed in my conversations with different business people and different investors is there seems to be one question. One question. Who can I trust? That's the question. It appears that the question is around credibility. I like the story of Nigeria. Over 200 million people, and the rate of growth, the rate of industrialization, the rate of electrification. I like that story. But if I am going to go into Nigeria, who can I trust? And I think the most important piece of work that all of us here have to do, beyond the action steps, is just to begin to do the work with finding credible partners to have the conversation. Just the conversation. Understand the nuance, the environment, the market, the players. Study the track record. Look at the people with whom you're talking to and the people with whom you're partnering. Even the investors that I've met with and spoken to here, from whom we're raising capital for the work we want to do in the continent, even those conversations, all I've said is the following. Don't give me money yet. Let's understand each other. Let's talk to each other. Let me understand how you work and how we work. Do we connect on values? Do we see the world in the same way? Do we have the same cycle about how do we think about return? Because in my environment, I don't measure return quarter on quarter. I measure return generation on generation. So it's not whether or not I can deliver good growth on quarter and deliver to the investors. It's, am I raising a different generation of Africans
but
who
not
will
everybody
create a
has
different
that
type of
outlook.
Africa?
I mean, you see, not every investor is going to take that approach and have that outlook.
Absolutely. And that's fine, which is why even the Africa story is the story that the Africans themselves need to write. And the Africans themselves need to go, this is what we're looking to do. I'm not by any means trying to say that there isn't an opportunity for short-term opportunistic investments. Of course there is. Of course there is. You want to get into telecommunications in the African continent, you go through the JSE, you buy MTN. You want to go into financial services, you go through the JSE, you buy Standard Bank. And just with those two instruments alone, you have access to telecommunications in much of the continent and financial services in much of the continent.
That's a lot.
Sure. So there is definitely opportunity in the traditional capital markets to put your money down and go, let me test and get a sense. Absolutely. But the question you must ask yourself is, do you have trusted, credible partners who give you true local knowledge and insights about what's happening in the market? Do you understand the environment that you're operating in? And what's your perspective? What's your view? Short term, medium term, long term? Do you want to deliver good quarter-on-quarter portfolio growth? Or do you want to do what DP World has just done with their acquisition of Imperial and think about how do we become a part not only of the industries, but of the logistics that connect the industries? That transaction sent waves across South Africa, not because it was an external party saying we believe in the story of this Pan-African logistics business, but because it was an external investor coming into the Pan-Africa and going, we want to invest beyond what is the headline. Not just the mining and the banking, but we see a logistics infrastructure that we know is going to be necessary to power the growth of this continent, and we want to be part of that.
And you say, follow on from this concept of trust, which I think is probably key in any investment. But, OJ, I want to bring you in here. And also when we look at, the fresh product consortium that you're working at, and indeed the agricultural business, how formalized is that business to the point where investors, can come in and see it? Or are we looking at a very scattered approach around the country? Is there something there that investors can come in and kind of see and feel and know that they can get returns, even if they're measuring them yearly, decades, whatever?
Thanks. It's true. We have opportunity. We are organized. We are organized in such a way that we know our smallholders work in groups and cooperatives, identified. They're bankable. You can trust them. Then they are linked to the exporter or an aggregator before it comes out. So we're very organized, and you can be able to invest. And the kind of investment we're looking at here could be semi-processing or could be final processing. You can extraction, because it's doable, it's possible. But just as you said about trust, I keep saying nobody postpones eating. So whereas we want to invest on many other things, but we are rich in food. We're rich in horticulture, and we're able to provide food security and food nutrition. But I just wanted to say this before I go into that direction again, before I tie it up, was one. If you want to know Africa's position is important, is ask yourself what's happened in April last year. When the pandemic hit, the entire world chickened out, but Africa fed the world. We gave our food. It means there's hope. And we were able to feed the world. It means we can be able to, you can trust us with your investment. We are organized. We can link you up to the entire system that is integrated, involving men, the young women, the youth, and the women in every level. So we are bankable. We are structured in such a way that investors should not fear to come down. And we work very closely with the governments, and also referring to a discussion yesterday with the African Continental Free Trade Area. You're not just investing in Kenya, you're investing in the biggest economy in the world today. And therefore, it cannot be risk when it's a big economy. Look at the economy, look at the 54 countries coming together in one block, breaking down all these barriers that we've seen before. We in engagements, therefore, if there's time to invest in Africa, it's now. So I want to give you an assurance that for the investors, it's an opportunity to come. And for the UAE being a gateway for our products, I want to say this. We're only 4.5 hours away from you. We are your neighbors. There's no other place you can go to invest. The best place to invest is to ensure that your neighbor is as happy as you are. So
and
that
how do we just in closing from you, I want to hear maybe a call out to, how do we escalate that? How do we get more people to really look and what do, what like in terms of the Fresh Produce Consortium, the agribusiness, what do you need? What's the next step that needs to make sure you're heading in the right direction?
What I need here is partnership, proper partnership with the leadership here, and we can start small and build it up one at a time. So we look at business connection, and we're able to work together with the leadership. I'm glad there's a conversation between ourselves and parts of people in the UAE, particularly the leadership, the chamber, and certain markets. We continue building that relationship. Once that relationship comes in, it's possible, as he talks about trust, it's possible for them to invest on the other side as we invest on this other side. And as Fresh Produce Consortium of Kenya, I want to give you an assurance that we're even opening an office here to be able to ensure that those linkages are happening. And we are opening an office in this month. By the time I leave this place, we'll have opened an office to ensure that there are linkages that take place immediately. Then we can trust us because we will station people here to help us to move. So we are ready, more than ready for business. And listen, you are not, and I say again, you're not investing in one piece of a country in Africa. You're investing in a block of 54 countries that have come together. We produce under the sun. It's 12 months of the year. 365 days. We are not in anything in terms of greenhouse emission. We are minimal. And when you look at the climate change, we are championing. We have forests, and we want to ensure that it's sustainable in whatever we do. So it's time for us to work together. So friends, let's dialogue. Come over, let's talk. Our governments are ready. The private sector is more than ready.
Yes.
This proper, robust legislation that has been put in place in the last couple of years. So really, any reason, anybody who has any fear, then they have their own fear. It's time to open up.
Yes.
Please come. Let's work together. Let's start one by one and build up the momentum and look at how it grows. It's time to invest in
I'm
Africa.
there with you. I think we're all there with you.
It's time to
and
invest
again,
in
it's
Africa.
about, talking, getting familiar, knowing who your customer is, knowing who your client is, understanding that. I'm going to leave you, you see the last word here. Your own personal mission, your corporate mission, your wider mission, as you say, really is to change that African narrative. In terms of business, investment, in terms of again, bringing the trust element to the very core of everything that business will do. How do we move forward on that? So I leave you with closing word on lead us forward.
When I started my growth fund, I had just exited my business. And I was thinking long and hard about the what to do next. That moment you get to in your life where you go, what does the next decade of my life look like and what do I want to dedicate it to? And I'd done 1 or 2 investments on the side and I thought this might be an interesting hobby to keep investing. I didn't recognize that it would consume me the way it has. Oh. And the reason it's consumed me is not because of the investments themselves, but because of the underlying people in whom you invest. It's seeing the impact in the community and the families and the countries where you're making those investments. So my clarion call would simply be this. First, start the conversation. You were talking about, we're set up here. And the reason we're set up here is not only to raise capital, but to talk to people who have bases of capital and say, want to chat to you and advise, help you understand what the opportunities are and frame investment opportunities. So number 1, start the conversation. Number 2, be clear on what your objectives are. Short-term, medium-term, long-term, which industries, which sectors, and understand the underlying opportunities as well as risks, because those 2 things do go hand in hand. And number 3, which is the most important, is frame the narrative beyond the headline. It's not just about how much capital can we put in, but it's also about what impact can we have, where else can we go, and how can we leverage the ecosystem. It takes a village to raise a child. And I'd like to think that this village has the opportunity, at the very least, to raise a few children.
Super, thank you so much. And I know our village of Dubai and our ever-expanding market here in the United Arab Emirates, and I think the great work that the Chamber of Commerce particularly is doing in really driving this forward, I think is commendable, and we can see the results of it. We can see this from the very beginning of the Global Business Forum with a focus on Africa, and it really has shifted, and I think we're all beginning to learn and have a deeper conversation. Gentlemen, I want to thank you. OJ, thank you so much, and Vusi, thank you so much for your great content, of course, but your great inspiration, I think, and the ambition that's there, and also, without a doubt, I think you bring us with you, and we'll soon be ready to run with you. But we have to wrap this up, and we have to run. So I want to thank you all for being with us. Gentlemen, thank you so much.